Have you ever stopped to think about how much one person, one leader's personality, their quirks, their ambitions, even their insecurities, how much that can just completely change the course of history, leading to things nobody thought possible? Right. Well, today we're going to dive deep into exactly that, focusing on a really fascinating figure, Kaiser Wilhelm II of Germany. Our mission here is to pull out the key insights from the history books, especially looking at materials around Kaiser Wilhelm II foreign policy and the road to war. Yeah. We're going to unpack how his way of dealing with other countries was this huge turning point for Germany, how it totally changed Germany's place in the world and, played a big part in the build-up to World War I. We'll break down the important stuff, make it clear, make it relatable for you.
Exactly. And Wilhelm's time as leader, from 1888 right up to 1918, it was such a dramatic break from the really careful, almost cautious diplomacy that came before him under Bismarck. It's a perfect period to try and understand the why behind these massive historical shifts, how one leader's whole outlook can really shape an entire era.
Okay, so let's get into it. Thinking about Kaiser Wilhelm II, what do we really need to know about his background, his upbringing, that helps explain the kind of leader he turned out to be?
It's really quite striking how his early life might have set the stage. So he was born Friedrich Wilhelm Victor Albert von Hohenzollern, January 27th, 1859, in Prussia. And get this, he was Queen Victoria of England's first grandson.
Wow, okay.
But his birth was really traumatic. It left him with a left arm that was, described as virtually useless and noticeably shorter than his right. And a lot of historians think this physical disability really stunted his emotional growth, that it played a part in his, let's say, reckless behavior later on. He was apparently extremely self-conscious about the arm, always trying to hide it. And it's more than just a biographical detail. It sort of reminds you that these huge world leaders are still human, right? And these really personal issues, insecurities, they can literally shift geopolitics and, contribute to global conflict. His recklessness wasn't just being impulsive. You could see it as this kind of desperate overcompensation playing out on the world stage.
Yeah, and that personality definitely comes through in the descriptions. He's called young, ambitious, and quite impulsive. Apparently he had a really volatile temper. Even as a kid, there was a story about him threatening to stab his uncle with a dagger when he was just 4.
Goodness.
And he really rejected his mother's influence, the sort of Victorian liberal ideas she tried to instill. He went all in on the Prussian ideal, the tough, disciplined military man.
Right. And that military service, starting when he was 21, that seems to have been really formative. It gave him a lot of self-confidence, apparently, made him more authoritative in how he spoke and carried himself. But it also seems to have fostered some deep resentments. By the time he actually took the throne, sources say he'd grown to hate the British, the French, and just about every other European power.
Wow.
Add to that an explosive temper and apparently no tact whatsoever.
So you can see how this kind of personality would immediately clash with the established figures. When he became Kaiser at just 29, June 15th, 1888, he ran straight into conflict with people like the Chancellor, Otto von Bismarck. And this is where things get really interesting, right? The clash with Bismarck. What happened there, and what new path did Wilhelm want for Germany?
Well, Bismarck, he was a master strategist, wasn't he? He'd spent years building this incredibly complex system of alliances, all designed very carefully to keep Germany safe and maintain peace in Europe. His main goal was pretty clear. Stop France from becoming too strong or finding powerful allies against Germany, and keep Germany strong itself, but not, overly provocative. Think of him like a chess grandmaster, always thinking several moves ahead, focused on stability, avoiding any disastrous checkmates.
But Wilhelm saw it completely differently.
Completely. He forced Bismarck out in 1890. He genuinely believed Bismarck's cautious approach, all those intricate treaties, were actually holding Germany back. Wilhelm had this grand vision of Germany, not just as a major player in Europe, but as a major global power, not just a European one.
And that led to this new policy direction.
Exactly. This new, ambitious, and frankly, quite aggressive foreign policy got a name. Weltpolitik. Literally, world politics. And the key thing to grasp about Weltpolitik, I think, is that it wasn't just a policy change. It was like Germany shouting from the rooftops that it was done being just a continental power. It was this national demand for status, maybe driven by feeling left out, but tragically pursued with such a lack of finesse that it almost guaranteed isolation instead of the respect they craved.
Okay, so Bismarck's out, Weltpolitik is in. What were the actual goals? What was Germany aiming for with this new assertive stance?
Well, fundamentally, the core aim of Weltpolitik was to transform Germany into a truly great world power on par with Britain and France.
And the first point often mentioned is Wilhelm's famous phrase, a place in the sun. What did it mean in practical terms?
Yeah, that phrase he used a lot, it really captures it. It was all about Germany wanting more overseas colonies, just like Britain and France already had huge empires. These colonies weren't just about prestige, though that was part of it. They were seen as essential for getting raw materials, for creating markets for German products, and for visibly showing off Germany's power on the world map. There was a strong feeling that Germany had been left out of the scramble for Africa, that big rush by European powers to carve up Africa in the late 1800s.
Right, like they needed to catch up fast.
Exactly. It's that feeling of missing out on a major competition and deciding you need to jump in forcefully to get your share.
Okay, second big goal, building a big navy. Why was a navy so crucial for Wilhelm?
The navy. Wilhelm was, by all accounts, obsessed with building a powerful navy that could rival Britain's. He had this deep conviction that a strong fleet was absolutely essential for showing Germany's strength, protecting potential colonies, securing trade routes.
But Britain was the dominant naval power.
Precisely. And this German ambition wasn't just a quiet plan. It ignited a significant naval arms race with Britain. You can imagine the alarm bells ringing in London. Britain, being an island, relied entirely on its navy for security and its empire. This was seen as a direct threat.
Makes sense. And the third element under Weltpolitik, expanding economic and military influence.
Yes. It wasn't just about colonies and ships. Weltpolitik also aimed to seriously boost Germany's economy on a global scale and, crucially, to establish its army as the absolute strongest in the world. The Kaiser seemed convinced that just demonstrating this power, flexing Germany's muscles, would automatically earn respect and deter anyone from challenging them. So overall, the goal was crystal clear. Ramp up Germany's influence and prestige across the globe.
So that's the vision. Ambitious, definitely. But how did Wilhelm actually try to make it happen? The sources describe his methods as often aggressive, unpredictable, and sometimes clumsy. So one of the first big moves, and you touched on this, was tearing down Bismarck's alliance system. What exactly did he do there, and what were the consequences?
Right. This was arguably a big mistake, maybe the biggest. Bismarck had this secret treaty with Russia, the reinsurance treaty. It was kind of a safety net, ensuring neutrality if the other was attacked by a third power. Vital for avoiding that dreaded two-front war. Wilhelm, though, maybe not fully grasping its importance or just wanting to chart his own course, simply let it expire in 1890. He didn't renew it.
And Russia.
Russia felt vulnerable, isolated.
Right.
And what did they do? They quickly formed an alliance with France, Germany's potential adversary on the other side. So boom, just like that, Germany faced the perilous prospect of a two-front war. France to the west, Russia to the east. It's like deliberately canceling your most important insurance policy, leaving yourself wide open to threats from both sides. A huge strategic blunder.
Okay, next on the list of actions. The naval laws of 1898 and 1900. We mentioned the naval race, but what were these laws specifically?
These were actual pieces of legislation passed by the German government. They mandated a massive expansion of the German Navy, more battleships, more cruisers. It was a clear, funded program aimed squarely at challenging British sea power.
A direct challenge to Britain's naval supremacy, as the sources put it.
Absolutely. And for Britain, the island nation, whose entire security and empire depended on its navy, this wasn't just competition. It felt like an existential threat. It really ramped up the arms race, pushed Britain further into cooperation with France and Russia, Germany's rivals, even things like building the Kiel Canal connecting the North Sea and the Baltic, which seems like just infrastructure, played into it. It allowed the German fleet to move between the seas much faster, boosting its strategic capability and, again, worrying the British.
Then we have something called the Kruger Telegram in 1896. This sounds like pure provocation.
It pretty much was. Paul Kruger was the leader of the Boers in South Africa who were resisting British expansion. There was a failed raid by British irregulars, the Jameson Raid. What does Wilhelm do? He sends Kruger a public telegram congratulating him on defeating the raid, essentially siding with Britain's opponents.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. It deeply angered the British, caused a massive outcry of rage against Germany in the British press and public. It was like publicly cheering for your main competitor's rival after they scored a point.
Yeah.
Just needlessly poking the bear.
Definitely not subtle diplomacy. Okay, moving on to the Moroccan crises. There were two, 1905 and 1911. What was Wilhelm up to in Morocco?
Morocco was technically independent, but France was steadily increasing its influence there, aiming to make it a protectorate. Wilhelm decided to interfere, twice. His goals seem to have been several things: challenge French dominance, maybe grab some territory or concessions for Germany, and crucially test the strength of the fairly new friendship between Britain and France, the Entente Cordiale. He wanted to see if Britain would really back France.
Okay, let's break them down. First, the first Moroccan crisis in 1905.
Right. So Wilhelm makes this dramatic personal visit to Tangiers in Morocco. He rides through the streets on a white horse, meets with the Sultan's representatives, and publicly declared his support for Moroccan independence. He basically said Germany would deal only with the Sultan, directly undermining French authority.
Trying to drive a wedge between Britain and France.
Exactly. It seems Germany didn't fully grasp that the Entente Cordiale of 1904, while not a full military alliance yet, was a serious agreement settling colonial disputes. Britain stood firmly by France. So, Wilhelm's move completely backfired. Instead of splitting them, it actually strengthened the British-French relationship. They presented a united front against German demands at the Algeciras Conference in 1906, which largely confirmed French influence in Morocco, though it paid lip service to German commercial interests. Germany came away looking isolated and diplomatically clumsy.
And then it happened again, the second Moroccan crisis in 1911.
Yes. This time, France sent troops into Morocco, citing unrest and the need to protect the Sultan. Germany saw this as France breaking the Algeciras Agreement and trying to take full control. So Germany responds by sending a gunboat, the SMS Panther, to the Moroccan port of Agadir, ostensibly to protect German citizens and interests, but really it was classic gunboat diplomacy, a show of force.
How did that play out?
It created another major international crisis. Britain again strongly backed France, fearing Germany was trying to get a naval base on the Atlantic coast of Morocco. Tensions were incredibly high. War seemed possible. In the end, Germany backed down again, getting only minor territorial concessions in the Congo from France in exchange for recognizing French control over Morocco. But the damage was done. This crisis, happening just 3 years before World War I, really solidified the alliances. It left no doubt, as one source says, that the traditional power balance in Europe had shifted into large blocks of power, with Germany relatively isolated.
Alongside these specific crises, the sources also mentioned Wilhelm's frequent "a place in the sun" speeches. Were these just rhetoric?
Well, rhetoric has power, doesn't it? These weren't subtle, nuanced diplomatic addresses. They were often boastful, quite aggressive speeches where he publicly demanded Germany's right to a place in the sun, meaning a major global role, colonies, influence. He probably thought he was projecting strength, demanding respect. But the effect on other European powers was mostly negative. It made them nervous and suspicious of Germany's true intentions. It fed into the narrative of Germany being pushy and unpredictable.
Right. And finally, under his actions, just briefly, other expansionist endeavors. Anything else significant?
Yeah, there were other things. A good example is the Baghdad Railway Project. Germany was financing and building this railway, planned to run from Berlin all the way to Baghdad in the Ottoman Empire.
Extending German influence into the Middle East.
Precisely. And this was seen, especially by Britain and Russia, who had their own interests in the region, as a strategic challenge. It was another piece of Weltpolitik, expanding German economic and political reach far beyond Europe. Construction went on from about 1903 until the war started in 1914.
Okay, so putting all these actions together, the clumsy diplomacy, the naval race, the crises, what was the overall impact? How did this change Germany's relationships and lead towards war?
The impact was profound and almost entirely negative for European stability. Let's look at the key relationships. With Britain, as we've seen, the naval race and Wilhelm's constant colonial jostling created deep suspicion and unfriendliness. Britain felt directly threatened, so they ramped up their own shipbuilding and, crucially, moved closer to France and Russia, forming the Triple Entente. Wilhelm's lack of tact didn't help either, like that disastrous 1908 Daily Telegraph interview where he managed to insult the British public while supposedly trying to improve relations. It was baffling sometimes.
Incredible. And France, was there any chance of reconciliation there?
Not really, not under Wilhelm. His aggressive moves in Morocco, the general saber-rattling, the whole tone of Weltpolitik just ensured that France remained hostile towards Germany. The old antagonism from the Franco-Prussian War was constantly being rekindled.
And Russia, after the reinsurance treaty lapsed.
Well, that decision had direct consequences. It pushed Russia straight into the arms of France, creating the Franco-Russian alliance. This was Germany's nightmare scenario realized: potential enemies on both its eastern and western borders. a direct result of abandoning Bismarck's careful diplomacy.
So Germany was isolating itself from Britain, France, and Russia. What about its allies? Austria-Hungary.
That alliance remained strong, maybe too strong. Germany consistently backed Austria-Hungary, its main reliable ally. Wilhelm consistently supported Austria in its disputes, especially in the Balkans, which was like Europe's powder keg at the time. This unwavering support, the famous blank check, would be critical in 1914.
So the sources summarize the consequences. First, rising tensions.
Absolutely. All these actions, the push for colonies, the aggressive speeches, the naval buildup, it just made everyone else nervous. It fueled an arms race, not just naval, but land armies too. The whole atmosphere in Europe became charged, suspicious, volatile.
And this led to the alliance system shift.
Yeah, the delicate balance Bismarck had created just broke down. Instead of multiple checks and balances, Europe solidified into two opposing camps. The Triple Entente, Britain, France, Russia, and the Triple Alliance. Germany, Austria-Hungary, Italy. That Italy's commitment was shaky. Germany found itself largely surrounded by powerful enemies, France and Russia, who were now allied against it, and Britain increasingly siding with them. Germany became relatively isolated despite its power. It's like Bismarck built this complex, fragile structure for peace, and Wilhelm just swaggered in and knocked it over.
Which leads us, tragically, to the final consequence.
Yeah.
The path to World War I.
It all came to a head in 1914. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria-Hungary in Sarajevo by a Serbian nationalist was the spark. Austria-Hungary, wanting to punish Serbia, looked to Germany for support. And Wilhelm, true to his alliance and maybe feeling cornered, gave Austria that infamous blank check, basically promising full support for whatever Austria decided to do. Russia mobilized to support Serbia. Germany, facing the two-front war it had feared, felt it had to act fast. Wilhelm became convinced, as sources say, that England, Russia, and France had conspired to knock out Germany. Germany declared war on Russia, then on France. Their military plan, the Schlieffen Plan, dictated a rapid invasion of France through neutral Belgium to knock France out quickly before turning to fight Russia. That invasion of Belgium brought Britain into the war, and just like that, the major powers of Europe were engulfed in World War I.
Such a devastating outcome. So wrapping things up, how do historians look back on Wilhelm II now? Let's touch on criticisms, legacy, and later life.
Well, there's no single view, as you'd expect. Some historians try to contextualize him, arguing he was, in a way, just a product of his time, a very competitive imperialistic era. That he genuinely wanted to make Germany strong and secure its place in the sun, but maybe lacked the skill. Others are much harsher. They argue his policies were fundamentally reckless and poorly planned, that he needlessly antagonized other powers, destroyed Bismarck's careful system, and bears significant responsibility for creating the conditions that made a major war much more likely. And importantly, post-colonial scholars rightly point to the very real, often brutal, negative impact of German colonial rule under his reign, particularly in places like Southwest Africa, leading to terrible violence and suffering. That's part of the legacy, too.
What happened to him during and after the war?
During the war itself, his actual power faded quite a bit. The military high command, figures like Hindenburg and Ludendorff, increasingly called the shots. As defeat loomed in 1918, there were revolutions in Germany and massive pressure for him to abdicate. He eventually fled to exile in the neutral Netherlands on November 10, 1918, and formally abdicated about 2 weeks later on November 28th. The new German Republic was declared. Interestingly, the Treaty of Versailles named him a war criminal, but the Dutch government refused to extradite him. He spent the rest of his life in exile at Huisdoorn in the Netherlands. He spent a lot of time trying to justify his actions, clear his name. He wrote memoirs in 1922, basically arguing that he defended his international policy and wasn't responsible for the catastrophic war that killed millions.
And his views on the rise of Nazism.
That's a complex and pretty grim part of his later life. Initially, he apparently had some hope that Hitler might restore the monarchy. But he grew alarmed by the Nazis' extremism and violence, particularly their persecution of Jews. However, there are also quotes attributed to him praising Hitler's early military successes, like one saying, "My Führer, I congratulate you and hope that under your marvelous leadership the German monarchy will be restored completely." So his stance seems to have been ambivalent and ultimately compromised.
And his death.
Kaiser Wilhelm II died in exile in the Netherlands on June 4th, 1941, from a pulmonary embolism. He was buried there at Huisdoorn because he'd apparently said he wouldn't return to Germany unless the monarchy was restored, which of course it never was.
So if we boil it all down, the key takeaway is that Kaiser Wilhelm II's foreign policy, this whole idea of Weltpolitik, was a really sharp, dramatic break from the past. His drive for colonies, the huge navy, trying to assert German power everywhere, while he aimed for Germany's place in the sun, his approach was just so often aggressive, impulsive, and often tactless. It ended up pushing other countries away.
Absolutely. Instead of securing Germany's position peacefully, his policies just cranked up international tensions, solidified opposing alliances, and were a major factor in the slide towards World War I. His reign really is a stark lesson, isn't it? A powerful illustration, as the material says, of how one leader's personality, their choices in foreign policy, can have these absolutely profound and far-reaching consequences on international relations and global peace.
It certainly is, and it leaves you thinking, doesn't it? How do we really weigh the long-term results of ambition like that? And maybe more unsettlingly, how often does a leader's own personal baggage, their insecurities, end up shaping world events even more than any grand strategy? Definitely something for you to mull over.